This week on Africa Update, a third of the global economy will be in recession in 2023, head of the International Monetary Fund warns. How should Africa respond to the impending global crisis? Also on this episode, we take a look at some of the major political highlights from 2022 in Africa. We'll also highlight some of the major events to look out for in the year 2023. This is Africa Update on Trust Television, reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. I am Ayuba Ilia. Thanks for joining. Welcome back. Now, a third of the global economy will be in recession this year. The head of the International Monetary Fund has warned. Kristalina Georgieva said 2023 will be tougher than last year as the US, EU and China see their economies slow. It comes as the war in Ukraine, rising prices, higher interest rates and the spread of COVID in China weigh on the global economy. Listen to this.
For most of the world economy, this is going to be a tough year, tougher than the year we leave behind. Why? Because the three big economies, US, EU, China, are all slowing down simultaneously. The US is most resilient. The US may avoid a recession. We see the labor market remaining quite strong. This is, however, a mixed blessing because if the labor market is very strong, the Fed may have to keep interest rates tighter for longer to bring inflation down. The EU, very severely hit by the war in Ukraine. Half of the European Union will be in recession next year. China is going to slow down this year further. Next year would be a tough year for China. Mm-hmm. And that translates into negative trends globally. When we look at the emerging markets and developing economies, there the picture is even direr. Why? Because on top of everything else, they get hit by high interest rates and by the appreciation of the dollar.
Now, for more perspectives on this, I am being joined by Adjoa Ajayi Chum, founder and CEO of Emerging Business Intelligence and Innovation Group, and an expert in African economic development.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for having me. Happy New Year.
Same here. All right, let's begin with your reaction to this prediction or projection by the IMF. It is projecting that a third of the world will go into recession in the year 2023. Let me start by asking your reaction. Did you see this coming?
Yeah, we knew 2023 was going to be a really tough year. Just look at the unprecedented event of the past year, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the energy crisis, the cost of living crisis, and all that is as the world was struggling to recover from the impact of COVID. And also, if the world's three biggest economies, which are the US, the EU and China, are all slowing down simultaneously, according to the IMF, then that will impact the rest of the world, including Africa.
Okay, so now, being that Africa is also going to be impacted, how should Africa react to this issue?
Essentially, economies and societies, they must strengthen governance and policies to boost the trade across the continent, such that the AfCFTA and also invest in technical and digital skills, plus skills that can accelerate Africa's green energy transition.
Well, it's coming at a time where a lot of African countries are dealing with very high debts, really. And they've been called for debt relief and all of that. How feasible is that now?
It's very feasible. So of them calling for debt relief, I think that there's a lot that Africa can do to prevent their countries, the African countries, going into more of this debt. I would say that the AFCFTA have huge opportunity to boost trade within the continent, to help assist, in terms of driving more funding into the continent and helping a lot of these economies to be more stable in this current time.
What's your assessment of the AFCFTA at the moment, as we've seen in the last year? Have we been able to do as much with that, program?
It's very difficult to say. It's still very new, and it does take a long time for free trade areas for you to begin to see the result of what they're doing. But I would say that it's a huge opportunity for the AFCFTA, the world's largest free trade area. Population of about 1.3 billion people and combined GDP of around 3.4 trillion. That's a huge opportunity. And AFCFTA will not only help to eliminate trade barriers and boost trade between African nations, but it will also create regional value chains, which will attract investment and create jobs and make the continent more competitive. So for me, I think it's we are on the right track. Of course, people are expecting that. But given all that is happening around the world, even some of the biggest nations, I think it is expected. But I'll say that Africa's manufacturing output by 2025 is projected to hit 1 trillion if all the 55 countries join the AFCFTA. At the moment, only a handful of nations have fully joined the trade, and therefore African governments must speed up and step up effort, fully implement it, tackling the governance, combating fraud, and boosting anti-corruption efforts.
At the heart of this global economic crisis is the disruption in energy supply, especially with the war between Ukraine and Russia. Do you see Africa as a provider of solution in this instance, given the fact that a lot of African countries, has deposit of mineral resources?
Energy security, Ukraine conflict has exposed how vulnerable the world's energy system is. Our resilience of, as a world, our reliance on fossil fuel from Russia and Ukraine, and also has prompted calls for an immediate transition to fossil-free energy. But this doesn't mean that this is the end of fossil fuels. So energy experts have said that demand for crude oil and natural gas will increase production in the US and Middle East, whilst Europe will buy more LNG and increase short-term coal consumption. So we can expect a diversification of energy sources, but one that risk further delaying rather than accelerating the green transition. So climate change impact. So if I'm looking at that also, it's a big problem for Africa. One of the regions of the world's most affected by climate change, despite accounting for just around 3% of global emissions. So a shift to greener energy is vital to boost Africa's resilience to climate change impact. If I'm also looking at economic and social benefit, Africa has rich natural resources and renewable power. So the energy transition will result in major economies and social benefit. The world's youngest continent, which is our dear continent, Africa, is expected to be home to 2.5 billion from that's by 2050, and 80% of them will live in sub-Saharan Africa, where less than half have access to electricity today. So the International Renewable Energy Agency has said that global reduction in emissions could have a positive impact on gross domestic products, job creation, welfare across the African continent. They've also issued a report that showed that renewable and other energy transition related technologies have already created 1.9 million jobs across the African continent. So I definitely think that Africa can provide a solution. Of course, there are also other setbacks that we need to focus on, we need to address, and I'll mention a few of them. There's just three of them. One of them is the finance and investment. Again, the International Renewable Energy Agency, they have claimed that Africa will require an average annual investment of around 70 billion. Then that would be to install 310 gigawatts of clean renewable power. So there's a lot of money required. There's also the lack of infrastructure. Many African countries have inadequate grid infrastructure designed to accommodate their conventional energy sources. That is resulting in high electricity losses and low supply quality. We've also got human and technical skills. That is also could be a setback that is required. And then also policies and politics. Fossil fuels are subsidized in a number of African countries, while some renewable energy sources like hydropower are shared resources and could be of limited use for energy generation where intense competition exists with other sectors or among other countries. So, and of course, Africa will need, strong leadership governance to help combat these. But definitely, Africa has a solution to this.
Okay. Now, do you see this global crisis fast-tracking the need for this energy transition like we've seen? I mean, these are challenges, yes, but on the flip side of it, does it also, provide or offer certain opportunities to take advantage of?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that, we've seen COP27 that took place a few months ago. We saw the level of attention that it received, probably the biggest ever we've seen. And it was dubbed the Africa COP for the first time. So I definitely know that from this part of the world and also globally, there's a lot of attention. We've also seen how climate change is affecting our world that we live today. We have a very short window to get it right. And of course, if we don't have a world that is sustainable, we can't do business. So I definitely think that it will accelerate a lot of these things that we're talking. The recovery of Africa, also the rest of the world. I believe that the focus and the attention, even in terms of being able to attract funding, is all going to be focused in that direction.
All right, one other issue that the African continent has battled with, the issue of political instability on the continent. We've had several coups, and tensions between countries and the rest of them. How will this hamper the efforts to, drive growth and development in 2023?
Thank you. So there is political instability in most places aside Africa, definitely. I think we've seen what is going on around the world. The political instability is everywhere. But I definitely believe that both the public sector, so the political side, the public sector and the private sector must work together with a coordinated effort in order to address a lot of these, especially the climate situation. It would have to be a coordinated effort for us to achieve the needed, the results that we're looking to achieve by 2030. So definitely, I think the private sector and the public sector will have to coordinate around what is the right policies in terms of funding. The banks need to step in to help support funding some of the projects that they need to fund. And of course, we will need a stable political system. I think some countries are stable, other countries are catching up, but it will be something that I would encourage all the different countries across the African continent to come together for the purpose of this.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ajay Chum, for joining us on Africa Update and giving us these insights.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. You're welcome. All right, this is Africa Update on Trust TV, reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. After the break, we'll take a look at highlights of some of the major political developments on the continent and what to expect in the year 2023. Join us again. Now, as part of efforts to support Africa's goal of strengthening...
Now, looking at the activity chart, as you can see right here, a total volume of 130...
Inherited a Boko Haram crisis that at that time was restricted to Yobe.
How secure are they? You can see security men with blood.
This is the road leading up to the...
Really, if you look at England's squad, you are looking at EPL, you are looking at their names. You are not looking at...
That's great.
Welcome back from that break. This is Africa Update on Trust Television, reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. Now, the year 2022 is undoubtedly one that has recorded many significant events, from multiple coups in Burkina Faso to widespread anti-France protest, tension between the DRC and Rwanda, and severing of diplomatic ties between Mali and its partners. The political landscape on the continent is experiencing a shift in relations from the West to Russia and China. In this report, we take a look at some of the major political highlights in Africa from 2022.
The year 2022 was an eventful one for the African continent. The most significant milestone was the 20th anniversary of the African Union in July. But beyond that, here are some highlights of events in the year. Let's start off with elections. Former Somali leader Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud won the 15-month-long delayed parliamentary vote to become the country's president after 3 rounds of marathon voting conducted under the security watch of the African Union forces in Mogadishu. In Kenya, it was a big battle between William Ruto, the estranged deputy of Uhuru Kenyatta, and veteran opposition presidential candidate Raila Odinga, who had an unusual backing from Kenyatta. Both Ruto and Odinga went neck and neck in the August 9th poll. 4 electoral commissioners refused to endorse the result, declaring William Ruto as winner. Kenya was on the precipice of conflict. A petition by Odinga in the Supreme Court was to no avail. William Ruto was sworn in as president. Other key elections in the year saw Angola's ruling party, MPLA, consolidate their long hold on power, but with a much reduced majority after significant gains by the opposition UNITA. On September 15th, João Lourenço took on his second 5-year term in office. In Equatorial Guinea, Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo was re-elected for a 6th term with 94.9% of votes, making him the longest ruling head of state in Africa and the world, excluding monarchs. The year also recorded a few coups, notably in Burkina Faso, where Roch Marc Christian Kabore was sacked from office by soldiers, and a junta led by Chief Lieutenant Colonel Paul-André Sandaogo Damiba, and he was installed as interim president. But his stay in power was not to be long. On the evening of September 30th, military officials led by 34-year-old Captain Ibrahim Traoré removed Damiba in the country's second coup this year. The next morning, angry protesters attacked the French embassy in the capital, Ouagadougou, after supporters accused France of harboring the ousted Damiba. But this kind of attacks was a one-too familiar event in the year. Anti-French protests swept through the Sahelian region, beginning first in Mali, whose junta in February accused France's military of deliberately dividing the West African nation. Mali kicked out the remaining French troops in the country. France accused Russia's Wagner mercenaries of staging what became known as the Mora massacre in Mali, where at least 300 civilians were killed. A never-relenting hot verbal exchange between Bamako and Paris. 49 soldiers from Ivory Coast arrived at the Bamako airport on July 10th as support for a UN contingent. Mali arrested the soldiers, accusing them of being mercenaries. 46 of these soldiers remain detained till date despite several diplomatic attempts. Other diplomatic spats: Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda. President Tshisekedi accused his neighbor Rwanda's Paul Kagame of supporting the M23 rebels, a force retook arms to stage a violent conflict in Congo's eastern North Kivu region. AU mediation efforts will later lead to a landmark peace deal between Ethiopia's government and leaders from the country's Tigray region in November, bringing to a halt the 2-year civil war. In Nigeria, terrorists attacked a train moving from the capital Abuja to the northern city of Kaduna in March, killing at least 7 people and kidnapping dozens of passengers. But it was only a foretaste of what was to come. On Sunday, June 1, a brazen attack left scores of worshippers killed in Owo, a relatively safe commune in the southwestern part of the country. In South Africa, Operation Dudula gained traction in a sign of growing anti-migrant sentiment in the country. President Cyril Ramaphosa soon found himself battling for political survival after an inquiry found evidence he may have committed serious misconduct in relation to a large amount of cash found in his Fala Fala farm after a robbery.
Now, let's look at what's ahead for the African continent in 2023. Nigeria in February leads Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Democratic Republic of Congo in election. Other areas to watch in the new year include Ethiopia's tricky peace process and Rwanda's diplomatic tension with the Democratic Republic of Congo. Let's take a look.
We'll start with politics. Nigeria, the continent's biggest economy, will hold its presidential and legislative elections come February 25th. June 24th elections are scheduled in Sierra Leone with proposed changes to the electoral system to allow for proportional representation. In October, on the 10th, Liberia, Africa's oldest modern republic, is slated to hold presidential and legislative elections. And in December the 20th, presidential and parliamentary elections are scheduled in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We move over to business, where meetings of the African Development Bank, which comprise the 58th Annual Assembly of the African Development Bank and the 49th meeting of the African Development Fund, the Africa Development Bank Group's concessional window for low-income countries, will hold from the 22nd to the 26th of May 2023 in the Egyptian resort city of Sharm el-Sheikh. Over in tech, the Africa Tech Summit Nairobi brings together tech leaders from across Africa and international players for networking and business opportunities. The summit, which has already sold out in 2022, will take place in Kenya from the 15th to the 16th of February 2023 and include representatives from tech corporates, mobile operators, fintech companies, investors, startups, and industry stakeholders. Now, the Africa Tech Summit was first launched in London in 2016 to showcase the growth of the tech ecosystem in Africa. There are other tech meetings taking place over the course of the year at different parts of the continent. We move over to sports. It's the first, as the 2023 Under-19 Women's T20 World Cup will be the first edition of the ICC Women's Under-19 Cricket World Cup, scheduled to be hosted by South Africa from the 14th of January to the 29th of January 2023. In athletics, the 13th African Games is expected to be held in 3 cities in Ghana. This will be the second time in history that the Games will be decentralized in a process that started in the previous edition held in Morocco. Due to this, 3 cities in the country were chosen for these functions: Accra, Kumasi, and Cape coast. Now, the 34th Africa Cup of Nations, initially scheduled to hold between June 23rd to July 23rd, 2023, was shifted to January and February 2024 due to the heavy rainfall that was predicted for that period. These are just a few of the events happening on the continent in the year 2023. There's more to take place on the great African continent.
And that's a wrap on Africa Update for this week. You can join us next week for another time on the program. In case you've missed, you can always catch up across all our social media platforms and also on our YouTube channel. I am Ayuba Ilia. Have a great year.